Jana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtotar Shatashi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Anattakoti Vaishnavarinda Ki Jai. All glories to the Sum devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the Sum devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the Sum devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, text number 6. Yatha Punah Sve Ka Idam Nivishya Sheti Guhayam Sa Nivritta Vritti Yogeshwaradishwara Eka Etad Anupravishto Bahudha Yathasit Yatha Punasve Ka Idam Nivishya Sheti Guhayam Sanivritta Vritti Yogeshwaradishwara Ekaetad Anupravishto Bahudha Yathasit Yatha Punasve Ka Idam Nivishya Sheti Guhayam Sanivritta Vritti Yogeshwaradishwara Ekaetad Anupravishto Bahudha Yathasit Yatha Punasve Ka Idam Nivishya Sheti Guhayam Sanivritta Vritti Yogeshwaradishwara Ekaetad Anupravishto Bahudha Yathasit. Please repeat.
Yogeshwaradishwara eka etad Anupravishto bahudha yathasi Yatha punasve kaidam niveshya Shete guhayam sanivritta vritti Yogeshwaradishwara eka etad Anupravishto bahudha yathasi
Yatha punasve kaidam nivesha Shete guhayam sanivritta vritti Yogeshwaradishwara eka etad Anupravishto bahudha yatasi
Mataji? Yata, as much as. Punaha, again. Sve, in his. Ke, form of space. Virat Rupa. Edam, this. Niveshya, entering into. Shete, lies down. Guhayam, within the universe. Saha, he, the personality of Godhead. Nivritta, without endeavor. Ritihi, means of livelihood. Yoga Ishvara, the master of all mystic powers. Adhishvaraha, proprietor of everything. Ekaha, one without a second. Etat, this. Anupravishtaha, entering afterwards. Bahuda, by innumerable. Yata, as much as. Asit, exists. Translation purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. He lies down on his own heart spread in the form of the sky, and thus, placing the whole creation in that space, he expands himself into many living entities, which are manifested as different species of life. He does not have to endeavor for his maintenance because he's the master of all mystic powers and the proprietor of everything. Thus, he is distinct from the living entities. Purport: the question regarding creation, maintenance, and destruction, which are mentioned in many parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam, are in relation to different millenniums, kalpas, and therefore they are differently described by different authorities when questioned by different students. There is no difference regarding the creative principles and the Lord's control over them. Yet there are some differences in the minute details because of different kalpas. The gigantic sky is the material body of the Lord, called the Virat Rupa, and all of the material creations are resting on the sky, or the heart of the Lord. Therefore, beginning from the sky, the first material manifestation to the gross vision, down to the earth, everything is called Brahman. Sarvam Kalav Idam Brahma. There is nothing but the Lord, and He is one without a second. Living entities are superior energies, whereas matter is the inferior energy. And the combination of these energies brings about the manifestation of this material world, which is in the heart of the Lord. Om Agyanat Mirandasya Gananjana Shalakya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutali Swayam Rupadakadah Mayam Tedati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Thaprakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamshta Shri Rupam Sagratam Sahagana Rakanatam Vidam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savarutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivishakan Vidamsha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurandi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranama Mihare Priya Vanchakapatu Vyashta Kripasandu Bhivacha Patita Nam Pavniyabhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putulishmati Bhakti Vikasa Swami Iti Namane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putulishmati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavari Pashtyati Deshadharne Bhutir Mahadviri Mafpura Vibor Nirmaya Shiti Yad Amush Purashaha Bhungti Gunan Shurasha Shudashatmaka Suranga Shishta Bhagavan Vachamsi Me. May that Lord who lies down in the heart, his own heart, and spreads in the form of the sky and enlivens that material creation also enter within my words and kindly please decorate them. So the translation, again, he lies down on his own heart spread in the form of the sky. And thus placing the whole creation in that space, he expands himself into many living entities, which are manifested as different species of life. He does not have to endeavor for his maintenance because he's the master of all mystic powers and the proprietor of everything. Thus, he is distinct from the living entities. So, what does that mean? I don't know. It's a little hard to understand. Some things in Krishna consciousness are like that. This is one of those things. It's in one sense, the language is just a little confusing. Basically, more or less, it's speaking of the universal form here. The Vrata Rupa is using poetry like that. Presumably, the heart of the Lord is the manifestation, or the sky is taken as the heart of the Lord. And the Lord, he lies down within that space. I'm not exactly sure what descriptions. Of course, Mahavishnu is lying down. Kshirodakashayi Vishnu is there within the milk ocean, and there's Mahavishnu also lying down. But specifically what sky has to do with this, I don't know. Sometimes things in Krishna consciousness is just like that. You don't know. There's many things in Krishna consciousness which we just don't understand. And maybe we can understand. Other things we can't understand. Sometimes that's just how it is. This is where the Bhagavatam starts to get a little difficult, because after this, it talks about creation, basically. There's this chapter, Vidura's talks of Maitreya, where he's asking a bunch of questions, and then there's the answers, the creation of the universal form, further inquiries, Brahma's prayers for the creative energy. That's a nice chapter. Then you have you get to calculation of time from the atom, and etc. like that. And it goes on to describe how the Kumaras were created, and the progenitors of mankind, the Manus, etc. like that, how the different species are there, and Lord Brahma, he's casting off different bodies, but they're actually not bodies, they're mental bodies, and from these mental bodies arise different living entities. So as it becomes a little difficult to understand, it's difficult to understand because it's Krishna's pastimes. Krishna's pastimes are difficult to understand. We can understand it in the 10th canto, those pastimes. In one sense, they're easy to understand. In another sense, they're difficult to understand. Just like Govardhan Puja is coming up. It's difficult to understand. On one level, it's easy to understand that Krishna... Well, okay, we take it in different ways. On one hand, it's difficult to understand how Krishna, a boy, could lift a whole mountain. It's impossible to understand. For us to see something like that, if we actually saw that, if we saw somebody do that, that would be impossible for us to understand, because we've never experienced something like that before. When we accept, though, when we hear that Krishna did it, then it becomes easy to understand. Because we understand that, okay, well, Krishna can do anything. Anything's possible in Krishna by Krishna's grace. He can do anything he wants. Just like he's tossing like a horse demon who's like 3 times the size of him, like over there. And then he expands himself and he kills Aghasura. Aghasura is giant, but Krishna blocks up his breathing. He enters into him and becomes like fire. And so it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense once you accept that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God and he can do anything he wants. So similarly, the same thing with the creation. The creation is Krishna's pastimes. Namav parasmai purushaya bhujase sad udbhava stana nirodha. So creation, maintenance, and destruction. It says lilaya, grahita shakti tritayaya dehinam. And him accepting the 3 modes of material nature is also his pastime. We don't usually think of it like that. Usually we think of pastimes as like what's going on in like the 10th canto, or but like by different avatars. What like Vamanadev is doing, or like Nrsimha is doing, that's like Leela. But like all this other stuff isn't Leela, but actually it's Leela. It's Leela, although it may not directly appear so to us. But it's just as bewildering as pastimes are, as Leela is. And specifically, because he so warns, Krishna makes the pastimes of creation very difficult to understand. How exactly Krishna has created, we're hearing here in the purport, what is that? I don't know the order, but here, the first material manifestation to the gross vision down to earth, everything is called Brahman. So the material elements manifest in such a way, one comes after another. I think the first is sound, and the last is earth, like that. And like each one develops another different quality on top of the other. And earth has the qualities of all other elements, in one sense. And it's just very difficult to understand. And then the whole universe is encased by these elements, and each casing is one layer after another. I could understand how like Earth is like a layer, because like I can see Earth. And then like fire is a layer because we can see fire. But how is false ego a layer? It's difficult to understand. Not just false ego, mind, etc. like that. It's difficult to understand because we don't have experience. But Krishna specifically makes it bewildering to understand. It's very bewildering to understand, actually. If you take it a different way, the scientists who are trying to understand how the universe created is completely bewildering to them under hearing things like this, because it doesn't line up at all with what their with their theories. A little bit lines up. There's some people who think the universe bounces, a bouncing universe, and that there's like a big bang, and then it keeps expanding, and then at one point it hits you could say like a, what is that? It's like when you throw a ball up and then it hits like the peak and then it falls back down. So similarly, the universe falls back down and then it starts to contract and then it'll just be like crushed at the end, big crunch. So some people think that, some scientists think that it's just like a loop like this, which would make sense because that's kind of what Krishna does. You could say it in one sense. He creates the universe and then he destroys the universe. But even then there's partial destructions and then there's full devastations. But the problem is, that doesn't actually seem to be happening because according to science, the universe is expanding more and more, and that expansion is accelerating. So actually, it doesn't look like the universe is going to contract. Rather, it looks like the universe will just expand infinitely, and then matter will become so separate from each other molecule matter, the whole universe will experience heat death. So that's the current theory in science. It's nowhere close to what Vyasadeva is talking about in the Bhagavatam. So how do you understand these things? The Bhagavatam is saying one thing, but your practical experience is saying another. Well, there's many different things that can be said. One, your senses lie to you in many different ways. You can't trust your senses. Another thing is Krishna, he can bewilder. I mean, here the word is used, Yogeshwara Dhishwara. He's the master of all mystics and he's the proprietor of everything. He can put anybody into illusion. He can make the material universe as bewildering as possible and as convincing as possible. And the more and more you look into and try and research the illusory universe, the more illusion you become. It's just like if you're having a dream and you get so wrapped up in the contents of the dream, you try to like investigate where the dream came from, you'll never reach an end. You may reach something. You may get some sort of like knowledge out of the dream, but really the dream will just put you into more and more illusion. So similarly, something is going on like that with this universe. People are trying to investigate break the universe down and try to understand it more and more. The thing is, not only these, the creation as it's coming from Srimad Bhagavatam, it's complicated, but even the material universe is super complicated. Formerly, people at one point thought that you could just boil things down to an atom, but then they split the atom, or they realized that you could divide the atom even further, and then you have subatomic particles, and then initially there are only just a few. Now there's something like 36 of them. Some of them they don't fully understand. And then even beyond there, when you go even further, when you zoom in further as to what those subatomic particles, how they work, what they do, it becomes even more bewildering, and the whole modern understanding of physics, Newtonian physics, it completely breaks down. So there's different models you can use to understand one level of reality and another level of reality. So if you try to zoom in on things, it gets very confusing. And if you try to zoom out on the universe, and you realize, according to modern science, is a bunch of, basically, it's a bunch of matter suspended in space and somehow got separated because according to them, it exploded at one point when the Big Bang happened. And then, but the tendency of matter is that it like attracts each other. And so actually, in other words, gravity, they call it. So actually, all matter is attracting each other and it's trying to come together just like we don't see it, but technically, according as they would have it, this wall is attracting this wall because gravity is pulling the matter together, but at the same time it's expanding because the universe is expanding, and they don't know why it's expanding. So there's a whole lot of different factors, basically. Even if you zoom things out, and then it becomes very complicated, even if you take it to the basic level of how the universe came, the because by their understanding laws of time and space and even matter, it came into existence like some nanosecond after the Big Bang actually happened. So before those things, time didn't exist, space didn't exist, all these things didn't exist, but they would have us. But their explanation is that matter was super condensed into one point, but that matter didn't exist, but at the same time it was condensed into one point. It doesn't make sense. Even if you look at it from a material scientific standpoint, their explanations don't make sense. These explanations also can be very bewildering. In one sense, they make sense, but in another sense, they're achintya, they're inconceivable. It's difficult to understand because Krishna has arranged the universe like that. So, what to do? Well, therefore, this verse is there. Tat tenukampam susamikshimanu punjanayavatma kritam vipakam hrid vapur bir vidadan namaste jiviti yo mukti pade sadhaya bhakt. That one who just awaits Krishna's mercy, constantly offering him obeisances, he can actually understand. He gets Krishna's mercy. There are many different things that are difficult to understand in Krishna consciousness. One thing is sometimes the philosophy. Basic philosophy is easy, just like Prabhupada at the end, he gives basic philosophy. The living entities are superior energies, whereas matter is the inferior energy. And the combination of these energies brings about the manifestation of this material world, which is in the Lord of the heart. That's pretty simple to understand. Living entities are spirit, but as a superior energy, whereas matter is an inferior energy. In one sense, that's easy to understand. Other things are more difficult to understand, just like I was saying creation, but there's so many different things. If you look at the Sankhya philosophy of Kapila Dev, how he presents it, it's pretty difficult to understand. When you get to the point of how you're different, even the point of how you're different from the body, okay, so we have these bodies and we have these minds, and we're like within them. We're the spiritual soul within the body and the mind, enlivening it by intelligence. And like we can kind of understand that, but at the same time, as Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita, we don't cause the material body to move at all. We don't cause it to, we have nothing to do with the actions and reactions of the modes of material nature. But at the same time, we're responsible for our actions, and at the same time, it looks like we're controlling this body by the means of intelligence. Even though intelligence is right now a material element, it's the, what is that? Something like aide de camp of the soul. So on one hand, we're like lodged in the material sense objects. On the other hand, we have nothing to do with it. So even if you break this point down, it's very difficult to understand. Other things are also difficult to understand. Why are some devotees put into not just some devotees, you can look at your own life, some events in our own life. It's hard to understand why Krishna has put us in the situation we're in. It's hard to understand why Krishna put some devotees in a nice situation. You could say he'll give them opulence, he'll give them good facility, whereas other devotees, it almost looks like they go through hell, both like materially and even trying to like sustain their spiritual life. They're in a very difficult situation. So why does one devotee have a good situation, another devotee have a bad situation? It's hard to understand. Well, one thing you can immediately understand is based upon one's previous advancement. That's one explanation. But even one may be very advanced, and then suddenly something chaotic may come in one's life and just throw everything off. One may be in a very good situation in Krishna consciousness. He may be coming to the temple every day. Just a good example. Mukunda Dada Prabhu, as we were discussing some weeks ago, he was living in Vrindavan translating Sanskrit literatures from the Goswamis. He was fully engaged in the devotional service. And then he got thrown into a completely different situation. His whole life basically got turned upside down. He didn't have devotee association. He was taking care of his mother, as we've heard. A completely different situation. Krishna just kind of threw like a curveball at him. I don't want to get into the details. We know that, but why did that happen? Why did Krishna do that? And Mukunda Dada Prabhu, he said at the end of it, I wouldn't recommend that anybody else did what I did. So why did Krishna put him through such a thing? It's hard to understand. It's difficult to understand. Therefore, there's verses there that we just go on expecting Krishna's mercy, despite not being to understand some things. Even when we may be reading the Bhagavatam, sometimes it's like that. We read the Bhagavatam, and we don't know what we just read. Even though we can comprehend the English of what we're reading, we can understand what each word means, but when you put them together, we just read over it, and actually we don't understand what the sentence just said, what the sentence just told us. Sometimes it's like that in devotional service. Sometimes it's like that when reading the Bhagavatam, reading complicated sections of Shastra. Just like if you want to study, just like in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's the glories of Nityananda Balaram, and there's a full description of how Nityananda in his form as Sankarshan, he creates this material universe, and the whole thing, basically, is difficult to understand. We can read it, but it doesn't necessarily mean we comprehend it. We can read the Brahma Samhita, but it doesn't necessarily mean we can fully comprehend what it's talking about. Even if we make a study of it, reads not just means, there's standard reading. You can even make a study of it, as some people have, but still, it doesn't mean we can fully understand some things. Some things in the Bhagavatam are contradictory. As is saying here, the questions regarding creation, maintenance, and destruction are mentioned in many parts of the Bhagavatam. Sometimes they come differently. For example, pradhan, this unmanifest material energy, is defined differently in different places of the Bhagavatam. You'll find here in the third canto, elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, it's described in one way, and the Kapila Dev, he equates it with the Mahatattva, for instance. But in other places, Mahatattva is differentiated from the Pradhan. Why is this so? Well, a few points. And then other things as well. Sometimes pastimes are described differently. Just like if you read the Mahabharata, the pastimes there are different from the pastimes in the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam. How Shishupal was killed in the Bhagavatam is different from how Shishupal was killed in the Mahabharata. Why are these things going on? One point, as Prabhupada is making the point here, the relation to different millenniums, kalpas. In different millenniums, things sometimes happen differently. Pastimes happen differently. The creation is mainly steady, as is said here. This point is repeated. Vidura inquires this point twice. He mentions the creation twice. He mentioned it in the last verse, and he mentions it in this verse. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says why this is so. He does so. He repeats this question just to make sure this point of repetition between millenniums. Is the creation the same every millennium, or is it different? What Prabhupada answers here, there's no difference regarding the creative principles and the Lord's control over them. In other words, the basic principles of creation are the same, and the fact that Krishna is God, and He's controlling the creation, and the creation comes from Him, it's all the same, it doesn't change. But the details of how these things go on vary from kalpa to kalpa, as well as the pastimes. Just like I was mentioning the Shishupal pastime is different. Why is it different? Because it took place in a different millennium. If you read the different Puranas, there's different pastimes of the same avatars mentioned differently. Just like in the Bhagavatam, of course, Bhagavatam, spotless Purana, we take those pastimes as the topmost, even above Mahabharata, for instance. But if you look at, for example, Nrsimha Leela within Bhagavatam, famously, Nrsimhadev broke out of a pillar and he killed Hiranyakashipu. If you look at Nrsimha Purana, it just describes that basically Nrsimhadev walked into town and then he killed Hiranyakashipu. As well as many different things. The sufferings that Prahlad went through, just different details. Not just Nrsimhadev, everything. Vishnu Purana, you'll find some, which also contains elaborations on Krishna's pastimes. Harivamsha as well. Different versions come differently. This is because Krishna has the same basic pastimes, same basic format, you could say, but the details are different. Because he likes to do so, different reasons, for variety's sake, to keep things fresh. There's different reasons Krishna may have for doing so. But so these variations are because of this, because of discrepancies in the millenniums. Same thing with Kali Yuga. Sometimes, just like Nam Sankirtan, chanting of the holy name of the Lord, is the Yuga Dharma for Kali Yuga. But Lord Chaitanya doesn't come every Kali Yuga. He doesn't. Sometimes the Yuga Dharma is inaugurated not by Lord Chaitanya, but by, we say, a Shakti Avesh avatar, empowered devotee, something like that. So it's different in different millenniums. So, regarding this point of things being difficult to understand, it's difficult to understand both for everyone, the devotees and also the materialists. Materialists, they can't understand at all. Even if they try to understand Krishna, they can't understand Krishna. Just like there's that verse, Avajananti ma mudha manishim tanum ashritam. They can't understand Krishna. Similarly, within the same prayers, Shukadeva Goswami, he says, Vidura kashtaya muhukka yoginam. That The devotees, they can very easily understand Krishna, but Krishna is very hard to understand for the mundane wranglers. For the mundane wranglers, he remains very, very far away. Similarly, a similar description is there in Brahma-samhita, that you can go at the speed of the mind trying to understand Krishna, but you can't even attain the tip of his lotus feet. So, but devotees can very easily understand Krishna just by having the faith that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. Of course, it doesn't mean we're not intellectuals. It's not that we're just some blind followers, but actually everything depends upon this. You can make a very intellectual study of Shastra, but if you don't have faith, as some do actually, some people make, you'll find scholars put together theses based upon this. Even in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, they all put together theses regarding conclusions like that, and they can come to a superficial conclusion, but actually they don't, it's intellectual at best, and they can't fully understand why actually the philosophy never actually manifests to them. Siddhanta doesn't manifest to them. Even if they can't understand something, it's only the external words they're perceiving. But they can't perceive the internal meaning of the philosophy and the internal meaning of Krishna's pastimes. Just like, for example, you could pull up, whoever's governing this could pull up Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya Lila 1918. And I'll just read the English of a few verses one after another. So, I don't know what context this is coming in, but Advaita Acharya had written a poem or a sonnet for Lord Chaitanya, and he delivered it. So Advaita Acharya had written a sonnet in an unequivocal language with an import that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could understand, but others could not. Next verse. In his sonnet, Advaita Prabhu first offered obeisances hundreds and thousands of times unto the lotus feet of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He then submitted the following statement at his lotus feet. Please inform Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is acting like a madman, that everyone here has become mad like him. Inform him that also in the marketplace, rice is no longer in demand. Further tell him that those now mad in ecstatic love are no longer interested in the material world. Also tell Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that one who has become a madman in ecstatic love, Advaita Prabhu, although that's Prabhupada's insertion there, he's giving us the understanding, but Advaita didn't write that, has spoken these words. When he heard Advaita Acharya's statement, Jagadananda Pandit began to laugh. And when he returned to Jagannath Puri, Nilachal, he informed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu of everything. So Jagadananda Pandit, he thinks is very funny, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu hears it, and after hearing the equivocal sonnet by Advaita Acharya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu quietly smiled. That is his order, he said, then he fell silent. Although he knew the secret, Swarup Damodar Goswami inquired from the Lord, what is the meaning of the sonnet? I could not understand it. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu replied, Advaita Acharya is a great worshipper of the Lord and is very expert in the regular principles enjoined in the Vedic literatures. Advaita Acharya invites the Lord to come and be worshipped, and to perform some worship he keeps the deity for some time. After the worship is completed, he sends the deity somewhere else. I do not know the meaning of the sonnet, nor do I know what is in Advaita Prabhu's mind. Advaita Acharya is a great mystic. No one can understand him. He is expert in writing sonnets that even I myself can't understand. Hearing this, all the devotees were astonished, especially Swarup Damodar. He became somewhat morose. From that day on, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's emotional state changed markedly. His feelings of separation from Krishna doubled in intensity. Anyway, it goes on from that, but I'll stop there. Well, okay, I'll read that one. Why not? As his feelings of separation and the ecstasy of Srimati Radharani increased at every moment, the Lord's activities both day and night were now wild, insane performances. And then it goes on to describe those insane performances. So what happened? What happened? It was just a sonnet. Advaita Acharya gave like a 2-line sonnet to like Lord Chaitanya. And it's not very clear what he's saying. Rice is no longer in demand. It's not even clear who he's talking about. He said he's talking about some madman, but it's not very clear. Jagadananda Pandit heard it. He couldn't understand what it meant. He just laughed at it. Lord Chaitanya, he smiled, but then he became very grave. From that day on, his emotional state changed markedly, and then we hear descriptions of how he starts like smashing his head, like dragging his head against the wall of the Gambhira, and there's blood causing sores all over his body, and then his limbs detached from his body, and all these crazy things are going on. So what happened? It's not very clear what what Advaita Acharya told Lord Chaitanya. Of course, if you know, you know. If it's evident here because our acharyas give us that understanding, and also Lord Chaitanya himself gave kind of hints as to what's going on. Basically, Advaita Acharya is he summoned Lord Chaitanya into this world, and now he's recalling Lord Chaitanya back to basically saying, you finished your pastimes, you can go now. Something like that, more or less. So we can understand it like this. Otherwise, we couldn't understand. Lord Chaitanya gave us some explanation. Otherwise, we couldn't understand what the heck Advaita Acharya was talking about. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes there's descriptions in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Some devotee says something, Lord Chaitanya says something, or there's dialogue between Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda Prabhu, and we don't know what they're talking about. We have the words, but we don't know what's implied. Just like, for example, also in the Antya Lila, I'll just summarize it. Gopinath Patanayaka, who is a devotee of Lord Chaitanya, he was the brother of Ramananda Roy and the son of Bhavananda Roy. So he's a very intimate devotee of Lord Chaitanya. He was a tax collector in the government at the time, and he was embezzling money, basically. And then somebody caught wind of this, and then a prince got wind of this, a prince of the kingdom caught wind of this, and he was envious of Gopinath, basically, for different reasons. And the prince went to the king, and he told the king that Gopinath is embezzling money. And the king said, well, okay, just find some way, punish him in such a way that you can get the money. And then the prince, he puts Gopinath Patanayaka, he arranges that he will be killed by means of what's called a changa, which is basically something like, it's like if you're on like a platform, and like that platform, like, at least what's in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's like a bunch of swords at the bottom of it, and like they get like either like dropped onto the swords or like pushed onto the swords, one of the two. So Gopinath Patanayaka was about to be killed like this because he was embezzling money for the government, and then of course he was a devotee. This was at Jagannath at Puri at the time. So all the devotees at Puri, they went to Lord Chaitanya and they told Lord Chaitanya, this is Gopinath Patanayaka. He's been lifted onto the changa. He's about to be killed. And then Lord Chaitanya, he replied something like, what can I do? I'm a sannyasi. I'm not going to get involved in all this. That's his problem. He embezzled money from the government. Now he's paying for it. He embezzles money from the government. Then he spends it on women. He spends it on watching women dance, etc. Things like this. And opulent clothes like this. So Lord Chaitanya, he didn't do anything. And all the devotees were really upset. So one officer who was there, Harish Chandra, I think is his name. So he went to the king and he told the king, hey, Gopinath Patanayaka is about to be killed because of his debts. This prince is about to kill Gopinath. And the king was like, well, I didn't say to do that. I didn't know that was happening. I just said get the money from him through whatever means. Then basically the king, I'm just glossing over the details. Then the king, he absolved Gopinath Patanayaka of all his debts. He appointed him as a tax collector in the same area, and then he doubled his salary because the king thought, well, he's embezzling money because he doesn't have enough money, so I'll just give him more money so he doesn't have to embezzle funds. So, and of course he was spared. So at the last moment, before he was about to be thrown off the changa and killed, Gopinath Patanayaka was spared. And he was given all these material benedictions. It's amazing, actually. You embezzle money, then you get a better position in this. You get a bigger salary doing the same job that you can imagine it. If somebody was embezzling money from the government, a governor was embezzling money, and then they're about to be punished, but then the trial is called off, and their appointed governor is the same region, and their salary is doubled. It doesn't quite make sense. Why would anybody do such a thing? So Gopinath Patanayaka, he went to Lord Chaitanya, and then he said, this is all your mercy. I was thinking of you on the changa. And then because of that, I received, everything came out, and basically I was like delivered by your mercy. But Lord Chaitanya didn't really do anything. He said to Gopinath Patanayaka that you've been delivered today by Jagannath's mercy. Don't do this again. Don't embezzle money from the government again, basically. So if you look at it, what happened? Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he describes at the end as the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, but it's not very clear what Lord Chaitanya did. The devotees approached Lord Chaitanya for help, but Lord Chaitanya denied to do anything. And then it looks like the king, because the king caught wind of it, he stopped everything. And it seems like Lord Chaitanya wasn't going to help his devotee whatsoever. And then at the end of it, nor did Lord Chaitanya have any intention of awarding him any sort of material. He didn't have any intention of pardoning Gopinath Patanaika. He didn't have an intention of doubling his salary, any of these things. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he says at the end of it, I have simply described the chastisement of Gopinath Patanaika and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's indifference. But the deep meaning of this behavior is very difficult to understand. The intentions of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are so deep that one can understand them only if he has complete faith in the service unto the lotus feet of the Lord. So, Kaviraj makes this point that only if you have faith in the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya can you understand these things. And Lord Chaitanya's actions are very deep. But he doesn't describe what happened. He doesn't go into it. He doesn't explain the deep meaning, why Lord Chaitanya was indifferent. He doesn't explain what happened there. Similarly, the chastisement of Chota Haridas, similar situation. Chota Haridas, Lord Chaitanya was super heavy against him. Chota Haridas, he just basically, at least according to what we have in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he went out with another devotee and he begged some rice from another devotee who's also just happened to be a woman, basically. And then Lord Chaitanya heard of that. It's not like he had illicit sex or anything like that. Lord Chaitanya heard of this, and he just completely rejected him. Of course, we're quite familiar with this story. Then the devotees approached Lord Chaitanya to try and again please accept Chota Haridas, and Lord Chaitanya doesn't do it. And then Chota Haridas is so distraught, he commits suicide. So what happened? Why did that happen? Of course, now we understand because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he gave us the explanation. But before that, we didn't have the explanation. We didn't understand what was going on. Similarly, Gundicha Marjan. The inner meaning of Gundicha Marjana, we didn't have that until Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explained the meaning of it. In other words, he explained that pastime in terms of Krishna won't enter into our hearts unless we clear it of all material anarthas. So similarly, Lord Chaitanya is again washing the Gundicha Mandir to demonstrate this. Otherwise, the inner meaning of this pastime we didn't have access to. Sometimes we have access, sometimes we don't have access. We don't have access to this pastime. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he didn't explain about it. Even if he explains about it, even sometimes the acharyas may explain something about a pastime, it still doesn't mean we can understand it. Ata Krishna namadi na bhavad grahim indriyahi siva mukhehi jivhado swayam eva spuratyadaha. Just like you can chant Hare Krishna, but it doesn't mean you're coming in contact with Krishna. It doesn't mean you fully realized the extent, it doesn't mean you have full perception of what is Krishna's name. It doesn't mean you're chanting on the level of Shuddhanam. So similarly too, you may be hearing pastimes, but it doesn't mean you can fully understand those pastimes. Only by Krishna's mercy can we actually understand. Just as by Krishna's mercy can we fully understand his name, fame, form, pastimes, etc. Pastimes also too. Only by Krishna's mercy can we understand pastimes. So getting to today's verse, what this means, he lies down on his own heart, spread in the form of the sky. Well, as I kind of explained earlier, it seems to be in relation to the universal form, that the sky is taken as the heart or chest of the Lord, and he's lying down somehow within that. And he's placing all the creation in that space. Another different way Srila Prabhupada takes in this verse, everything's resting on Brahman. Everything's resting on the Brahman. Sarva kalav idam Brahma. There's nothing but the Lord, and he is one without a second. So Srila Prabhupada takes in this, he's explaining a little bit in terms of Brahman. A few points on that. In other words, everything is resting on Krishna, so therefore it's called Brahman. Let's see. The creation is resting upon Krishna. How is it resting upon Krishna? How does that make sense? Well, the creation is ultimately resting upon impersonal Brahman, which is in a sense, I mean, it is Krishna. Krishna is effulgence, and in that sense, is just as good as resting upon Krishna himself. Even the material creation, as described, Srila Prabhupada in Bhagavad Gita, there's one verse. Brahmarpanam brahmahavir brahmagno brahmanahutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahmakarma smadhina. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full conviction to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So basically, what this verse is saying is that one who does the offering is Brahman, what is offered is Brahman, the sacrifice itself is also Brahman, etc. like that. And Srila Prabhupada in his purport, he says the word Brahman means spiritual. The Lord is spiritual, and the rays of his transcendental body are called Brahmajyotir. His spiritual effulgence, everything that exists is situated within that Brahmajyotir. But when the Jyotir is covered by illusion, maya, or sense gratification, it is called material. This material veil can be removed at once by Krishna consciousness. Thus, the offering for the sake of Krishna consciousness, the consuming agent of such an offering or contribution, the process of consumption, and the contributor and the result are all combined together, Brahman, or the absolute truth. The absolute truth covered by maya is called matter, otherwise it's Brahman. Matter dovetailed for the cause of the absolute truth regains its spiritual quality. Krishna consciousness is the process of converting the illusory consciousness into Brahman, or the Supreme. Anyway, this purport continues like that. But so there's one way of understanding it, is that the Lord expands himself in the form of sky, but all these material elements, it's just an expansion of the Lord himself. It's just, as Prabhupada says here, Brahman covered by sense gratification. It's called Maya, basically. Interesting way of putting that, or illusion. But it's still Brahman in one sense. Just like we have the AC and heating, sometimes we flip between the two, but it's the same electric current that's running between it. So on one level there's a distinction. On another level there's no distinction. On one level there's a distinction between Krishna and us. On another level there's no distinction. Achinta beta beta tattva. It's difficult to understand. Therefore this word achintya. These things are very difficult to understand. On one level, we can understand it. On another level, it's difficult to understand. Some people can't understand. Actually, it's like that. Some people, we try to explain to them Krishna consciousness, even the point that they're not their body. Some people just can't understand it. Some people don't have the intelligence to understand it. They can't understand that they're not their mind and they're not their body. They can't conceive of an existence separate from that because they're so immersed in the modes of material nature. So somehow Krishna has been merciful upon us, and at least we can understand by philosophy that we're not these bodies, we're not these minds. Otherwise, we couldn't understand just by a dry study of it. There was some discussion previously as to what is consciousness, controversial topic. But you see, material philosophers, at least Western philosophers, Chinese, I don't know their philosophy, but Western philosophers, you see, they use this word consciousness, and actually they're talking about the mind. Just like a very famous thing, just like Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am. So he's acquainting his own mind. The fact that he thinks is a huge philosopher. Descartes was a huge philosopher, and he's still a huge philosopher. Many people study him. If you take a philosophy class in any college, you study the ideas of Descartes, and even his ideas, to some extent, are influential even today. But the guy was thinking that he's his mind. He couldn't transcend the concept that I am my mind, I am my body, I am this bag of chemicals, I am this bag of senses. He couldn't go beyond that. Maybe the senses, but he couldn't go beyond the conception that he's his mind. So even one may be very intelligent, on a material platform, you read these philosophers. Actually, it's amazing. It's like you're trying to decipher some sort of like hieroglyphic, reading like their philosophy. It is super difficult to understand. And it makes you think, how could they come up with such a thing? You know what I mean? How is it possible that they just sat there and thinking, how did they come up with it? And it makes sense. Actually, if you think about it in their terms, all these speculative philosophies, they make sense in one way within their own paradigm. You know what I mean? Empiricism, in one sense, it makes sense. What is that? Nihilism, in one sense, it makes sense. If you view it through their lens they're looking through, it makes sense. They put forward pretty good logic. And they've come to that logic through their own mental facility, and they've described it in such complex language. It's amazing, but it's all wrong because they can't understand the basic point. They've utilized their intelligence, but they don't, because Krishna's mercy isn't there, because Krishna hasn't given them real perception of himself, what to speak of even Brahman. Krishna hasn't even given them understanding of what is spirit. They can't go beyond that. So even you may be very learned intellectually, but it doesn't mean you can understand. Even one maybe make a dry study of the Bhagavatam, as some people do, as I was mentioning, and they can understand how these things are going, how the creation is going on like this, but it doesn't mean you'll understand devotionally. One thing, let's see. One thing regarding the creation is that Krishna is the creation. Krishna makes the creation. Krishna also is the creation. You can pull up this verse. Here's another bewildering one from the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, 7, 9, 20. Actually, if you look at Prahlad Maharaj's prayers, practically half of them are very, very difficult to understand. Prahlad understood them, otherwise he wouldn't be saying them. There's this verse. You can go to the Sanskrit, because the Sanskrit itself is the Sanskrit is even more difficult to say than the verses to understand. Yasmin yato yarhi yena cha yasmad, yasmai yata yad uta yastava parova, bhava koroti virkoritis pritaksva bhava, sanchoditas tad akilam bhavadas rupam. He says, my dear Lord, everyone in this material world is under the modes of material nature, being influenced by goodness, passion, and ignorance. Everyone, from the greatest personality, Lord of Brahma, down to the small ant, works under the influence of these modes. Therefore, everyone in this material world is influenced by your energy. The cause for which they work, the place where they work, the time when they work, the matter due to which they work, the goal of life they have considered as final, and the process for obtaining this goal, all are nothing but manifestations of your energy. Indeed, since the energy and the energetic are identical, all of them are but manifestations of you. So Prahlad is saying here, my dear Lord Nrsimha, you're everything. You're everything. You're the cause. You're where I'm at. You're what I'm doing. In a sense, you're even this body. This material body is also Nrsimha. He's saying like this. Literally everything. The material manifestation is Krishna. Everything that's going on. Because otherwise, this verse is paired with a previous verse. You can go back to that, which is more famous. Balasya neha sharanam pitaro Nrsimha. Nartas chagadam odandviti majado now ho taptasya tat pradividhir yahansa sishtas tavad vibodhanubrutam tvad vikshitanam. O my Lord Nrsimhadev, O Supreme, because of the bodily conception of life, embodied souls neglected and not cared for by you cannot do anything for their betterment. Whatever remedies they accept, although perhaps temporary beneficial, are certainly impermanent. For example, a father and mother cannot protect their child. A physician and medicine cannot relieve a suffering patient. And a boat on the ocean cannot protect a drowning man. So, what is that? Where's the key point? Oh, if they're neglected and not cared for by you. Because why? This verse is connected with the other one. Because Nrsimhadev is that boat. Nrsimhadev is that. Of course, Nrsimha also offers that protection. That's also there. But literally, Prahlad says, he is that boat, he is that medicine, etc. like that. He's everything. Even if the boat happens to take a man over, Nrsimhadev still protected that man because Nrsimhadev is that boat anyway. Krishna is everything, yet at the same time, he's aloof from everything. There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, somewhere in the 6th chapter. Pashyati me yogam Aishwaram. What is that? Does anybody know how that starts? It's 9. Okay, sorry. Yeah, go to 9.4 of the Gita. If you don't mind. I mean, even in the Gita, there's contradictions. Krishna says, I'm fair to all, but I'm especially partial to my devotees. What does that mean? How can you understand such a thing? How can you be equal to everybody, but you're especially biased towards one person? So similarly, Krishna says here, Mayedanam idam sarvam, jagaravyakta murtina, matstani sarva bhutani, nacham tesvavastitaha. By me, in my unmanifested form, all this universe is pervaded. So that's what Prahlad in one sense is saying. He's everything. All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. Okay, this kind of lines up with like today's verse 2. Okay, that makes sense. So Krishna, in the Sanskrit, what is that? Mat stani sarva bhutani. He says very clearly, I'm situated in all living entities. Okay? Or all living entities are situated with me. And he says, nacha mat stani bhutani. The Sanskrit is exactly the opposite. He says, mat stani sarva bhutani, nacha mat stani bhutani. He says the exact opposite thing. He said one thing, and then he says the exact opposite thing. Then what does he say in the Sanskrit after that? Is it easy to understand? Pashya me yogam aishwaram. Can you go to that? It's frozen. Pashya me yogam aishwaram. Just see my mystic opulence. I'm able to do one thing, and at the same time, I'm able to do completely the opposite thing. And yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Everything that's created, it rests in me. He lies down on his own heart spread in the form of the sky, and thus placing the whole creation within that space, his chest. But then here he says, and yet everything that is created does not rest in me. So actually, the creation doesn't rest in his heart at the same time. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of this cosmic manifestation, for myself is the very source of creation. So, yeah, the conclusion is that is Krishna's mystic opulence. It's difficult to understand, it's difficult to quantify, even if you go with the Bhagavad Gita. It's difficult to understand. I mean, you can read the translation, you can read Srila Prabhupada's commentary, and sometimes it can make sense like that. But if you really think about it, Krishna just contradicted himself. He does it multiple times in the Bhagavad Gita. He tells Arjuna, I'm giving you the best of knowledge. And then he says, oh, well, now what I'm giving you is even better than what I've told you before. He says in the 9th chapter, I'm giving you the most confidential knowledge. And then in the 14th chapter, he says, I'm speaking to you the even more elevated knowledge. Paramam Gyanam, something like that. The most elevated knowledge. So what's higher? What he spoke before or what he spoke later? But then we understand the middle chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are the most confidential, and everything else is kind of like an external covering like that. So, how to understand? Some things we don't understand. We understand through mercy, principally through mercy of the spiritual master. Otherwise, we couldn't understand anything. Without the commentary of Srila Prabhupada, we couldn't understand even what this means in Bhagavad Gita. We can't understand Bhagavad Gita without explanation of Srila Prabhupada. When I first read the Bhagavad Gita, even then, sometimes the Acharya may be explaining, but we don't understand what the spiritual master is saying. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes we misinterpret the spiritual master. That's a whole different subject. The first time I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, I didn't know anything. I just got the Bhagavad Gita. I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, and then Prabhupada, so many times in his Gita, he makes the point that you shouldn't accept someone's interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita. You should just take it as it is. But I got from that, this is him writing his interpretation of Bhagavad Gita, so I just stopped reading Srila Prabhupada's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. From his commentary, I got that idea from Prabhupada's own commentary. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes we read something, of course, then I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand anything, so I went back to reading the commentary. But sometimes it's like that. Sometimes we'll read something the spiritual master says, or the spiritual master may even say something, and we don't fully understand what he's talking about. We don't understand what he's talking about. We don't understand what he wants. We don't understand what he, or we think we understand what he's talking about. We don't understand. Particularly when we're neophytes, this is what happens. We don't understand. One who is advanced, a first-class disciple, he can understand what the spiritual master wants, even without asking him. Second-class disciple, he doesn't understand what the spiritual master wants, and he has to ask the spiritual master what he wants. And a third-class disciple, even the spiritual master may be telling him what he wants, but either he doesn't do it or he doesn't understand anyway. So we have to try to make advancement like this. Of course, what to do in this situation? Best thing is to ask the spiritual master and trying to work it out. Sometimes the spiritual master may be even seeing that his disciples do something that he didn't intend to do, There's different cases where Srila Prabhupada's disciples doing something like that. A few different cases, actually. Therefore, the spiritual master is there for correction. And specifically regarding this, Shastra is to be understood through the spiritual master. So even confusions in Shastra, they're to be put forward to the spiritual master and be clarified. He may not be able to understand everything even. The spiritual master may not necessarily be able to fully elaborate how time is calculated from the atom. May not be. Because the basic principle is faith. Just as, the basic principle in Krishna consciousness is faith. This sort of empirical understanding, of course, I'm not denigrating it. Of course, that's there. Devotees should understand it as far as possible, and some should become even expert at understanding it. Otherwise, we'll look like idiots if somebody doesn't understand it. So this understanding should be there, but the basic thing is faith. Understanding may be there, may not be there, but the key thing is faith. Faith in the spiritual master and faith in the words of Shastra is the main thing. We may not understand what Bhagavatam is necessarily talking about, but if we go on reading with faith, then purification will happen. And actually, that's what we're trying to do. We're not looking for any sort of dry knowledge, to accumulate dry knowledge. We can do like that, we can get jnana, but we're looking for vijnana. We want to realize what is Krishna. Because when we realize that, everything else becomes automatically realized. Just like when the sun rises at morning, everything else becomes illuminated. So similarly, by just focusing and trying to understand Krishna, then all these other points of Krishna consciousness can become revealed to us. Everything for the Bhagavatam. There's so many things. The universal structure is another big hot topic of how to understand that, the creation, Krishna's pastimes itself, etc. Okay, so I'll end my class there and take anything anybody has at this point. Anything?
Of this in Krishna's in Krishna's pastimes and like Krishna book and all that is that seeing Yashoda, she kind of like, we're like looking at all this and we're going, how is this understandable? And then Krishna opens his mouth and then she's in the universe and then she's seeing
herself in the universe.
seeing herself in the universe in Krishna, and it's just like instance where like she doesn't really, she faints, or whatever, but she does. It's not given so much significance almost, or she forgets. But it's like that. You see pure devotees of the Lord, they may not particularly understand those things either, but it's not like it'll stop their love towards Krishna. It's not that because she saw that, she's like confused where like, who is this boy? What's his deal? Who is God? What the hell's going on? And there's a universe inside his mouth. It's just like, it's instance where it's not understandable at all. I mean, I guess everything Krishna does in Vrindavan, it's like, what the heck, It's like, he threw down 2 Arjuna trees with the grinding mortar. It's like, how is that understandable? But it almost seems like the Brajavasis, they're able to just kind of, the love for Krishna is just kind of like, that I guess that yoga maya aspect, is that love for it, it's just kind of, okay, whatever. And they just kind of continue on with their day with loving Krishna. Obviously, we should understand everything, but my main point I'm saying is like, it's not that it should make us question our devotional life. So certain of these things which are like really hard to understand sometimes, or it's almost inconceivable or contradictory in certain stages. It's like, well, like you're saying, Krishna says this, and then he says that. How the heck are we going to understand this? And then actually after that, he says, well, this is it's inconceivable, and then he gives the example how it's something that's inconceivable. He gives the example of something that's inconceivable, which is all contradictory. But at the same time, that the aspect of love for Krishna, like you're saying, the faith, it seems that overcomes all of these sometimes inconceivable things. You're able to conceive of them just by love. So it's interesting how, like, that's why Krishna makes the point, devotion is the most important aspect of, this is like, that's the highest thing, because you won't be able to understand it all with jnana. But then with the self of love of Godhead, with the proper vision, you'll be able to, it becomes realized more than even just like knowledge. You just become realized in it, so there's no need to philosophize in it so much either. So, because you understand the essence of it is to love Krishna ultimately. The reason to understand all this is to love Krishna, but you're already there. The pure devotees are already there. So like, the Jnanis and all of these people, Krishna tells them, this is a very difficult path to go down. Don't do it. Because like, how the hell would you be able to like, And you come to impersonal realization. It's like, how the hell can so many contradictions? He walks, but he doesn't walk. All of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how the bhakti is like how the pure devotees, they're not disturbed by it. They don't, whatever. It's just like go on in life and love Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like interesting how that, you're saying Vijnana is important, and that's exemplified in bhakti, that that loving reciprocation with Krishna.
Even though devotees may have the knowledge, but they don't really care about the knowledge either. It's just like the gopi, they knew that Paramatma was in the heart. They knew that Krishna was in the heart, and Uddhava was telling them that. They had the knowledge, they understood that, but they weren't satisfied with that. They wanted Krishna. They wanted Krishna to come back to the Vrindavan. Even though they had the knowledge was there, that relationship is even more bewildering to understand. Talking about things that are hard to understand. It's hard to understand how Mother Yashoda can have the thought that my son is God, but her parental relationship never becomes disturbed. That's very difficult to understand. It's hard to understand the gopis understand that Paramatma is existing within their hearts, but at the same time, they're completely absorbed in a conjugal relationship, their respective conjugal relationship with Krishna. Of course, it's inconceivable. You can't understand the relationship. That's just something you come to like an experience. You have to taste it, basically. At the point of, you have to taste rasa. You can't explain it. It's just like if you try to explain a song, and like if I explain why like a part of a song sounds like very, very nice, you can't even do so, but it doesn't make sense. Actually, the real sense making is done when you hear the song itself. So similarly, when you taste rasa, then you actually begin to understand what is what. Rupa Goswami says something similar to that within Nectar of Devotion Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that it's practically or the actual understanding comes by tasting it. Although descriptions can be given, the actual realization is something very, very different. So yeah. Anything else? Vamshi Prabhu. There's like 5 hands that went up, so we don't have that much time.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I think maybe these different aspects that Krishna is expressing, maybe sometimes he's bewildering, sometimes he's giving that knowledge to understand. It's like for the different categories of devotees are there,
That's also true, yeah.
Yeah, because somebody will come to Krishna with love. He doesn't like the gopis. They don't want to do anything with these technical aspects of. They don't even want Vishnu, isn't it? In one of this pastime we see that.
Yeah, I was thinking of that too. Yeah.
So, and for some it may be, like they would like to get into the details and technical aspects, and that can pull them. And for some it will be bewilderment because they are envious of Krishna. So it will be, like in the whole Mahabharata we see that different people are reacting different ways, Like Vidur may be reacting to Krishna's activities in a different way. Shishupal reacted differently. So it's like, maybe we have to, like in Bhagavatam it said that we have to go through that scrutinizingly. Like sometimes we just rush on with, whatever we are reading, or like we just, like, and I saw that when second canto I was not able to understand.
Yeah,
it's very technical. So then, like I'm a slow reader. Like I don't go further. Like if I am not getting. So then I started writing that whole stuff. To get it understood. Because if I don't understand, then it's going to bewilder me. So that way I did. So that's the way I feel like. Even in this, if you see that Krishna is expressing, example, if we take this purport. So here he is saying that I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I am not a part of the cosmic manifestation. So he's saying that, basically saying that I am the maintainer of all living entities. And although I am everywhere, but I am not part of the cosmic manifestation. That means he is not
same quality like that.
Within means like that. He's saying that he is not part of the material energy, but his material energy is doing that act. Like how we understand about Krishna is not affected by 3 gunas, means the word nirguna is used, isn't it? So that means he is not affected by the gunas. Similarly, here it is expressed that he is doing all these acts, but then via whom he is doing? Via the material energy. So maybe what I am speaking, that may be bewilder to you.
Yes, yeah. It's bewildering. Some things even to, sometimes you hear things and they're bewildering. I mean, yeah, how to say, some things you might, like, even to understand them, at least, I don't know, for me, I have to read, you know what I mean? If somebody reads out like a long purport, I can't understand it, something like that. You know, if somebody was to read explanation of Brahma Samhita to me, I would never be able to understand it, you know what I mean? When you write it down, it becomes a little easier, but even some people understand. I mean, just like Parikshit Maharaj, he understood at least most of it. He was asking questions about the Bhagavatam, even though he was hearing it like that. So, yeah. Anything else? There are a few more hands here. David was the first, so I'll go with him. David, can you go?
There was a mention of faith, and I was just wondering, like, what is the difference between blind faith and like proper faith? Because Prabhupada is giving us caution that we shall not accept things blindly, we shall not have blind faith, but it's hard for me to differentiate between what is faith and what is blind faith.
Yeah, common question. Well, it's not that we're entering into Krishna consciousness just like, okay, well, I accept everything that's there just because. We have a reason why we do so. At least, it seems like most of us, we accept these descriptions because we see other parts of the book work. I mean, the same book that contains descriptions, or just take Gita, what Krishna is saying here. Also, in Gita, the creation is described too, in one sense, in one very succinct way. Also, what's coming there. So there's point of a very detailed explanation that you're not your body, you're not your mind, you're a spiritual being. And you're illuminating the body by consciousness. It makes sense. And actually, you can have some experience of this. And even you can have the experience that, chanting Hare Krishna works. The process works. The process works. Now, we may not be able to have understand each and every point. I may not get darshan of the cosmic manifestation in this lifetime, but I have faith in the description in the Bhagavatam. Why? Because the other parts of the process works. It's obvious, Krishna gives spiritual vision to devotees, and you can obviously see Krishna's reciprocation. The fact that we can understand that Krishna is reciprocating with us, it's like, of course, to other people it seems like blind faith, but again, it's like trying to describe like the taste of honey to somebody. You have to taste it yourself. So the faith is there, but it's not blind because we have experience practically that Krishna consciousness works. And Krishna is a person. He's like there and he interacts with us. So I would say that. You can put different arguments, but I think that's the strongest argument. Is okay?
Yeah. For me, at least, like maybe my mind is just too crooked, but for me, faith, when you experience it, is no longer become faith.
It becomes knowledge.
It becomes knowledge,
actually. Yeah. We use that word faith, and that is there. It translates like that. It's a literal translation. It is like that. Faith is still there. It's not necessarily, we may have knowledge, for example, that we're not our body. We may have even experience, even karmis can get experience like that they're not their bodies. We can get that sort of knowledge. Now, we may not have seen, for example, Krishna create the material universe. So something like that we may have faith in. But based upon knowledge, we can extend our faith. Does that make sense? Based upon what we already know, what we have knowledge of, what is actual genuine in Krishna consciousness, the whole thing is genuine. But based upon the knowledge Krishna gives us, not just knowledge, actually, realization that Krishna gives us, from that we can extend our faith. I would say like that. Is okay? Yeah. Okay, so do the Matijis have anything? Yes. We can go over there. Otherwise, there's no time. It's already 9 o'clock.
Who's first?
You can go. We can take both.
So I have like this brief like understanding of like I had read or heard something that I can't cite. So I just want to know if you had heard something similar. Basically that at least the first time when we're reading Prabhupada's books, we should just keep reading. We shouldn't get caught up in trying to, understand everything and try and study in that moment, that we should just keep reading. Have you heard something like this?
Well, it's not necessarily right or wrong. There's no wrong way. Well, there are. But at least between those options is not necessarily wrong. But if you want to make a study of something, what I would suggest, just read the whole thing once and then go and read the whole thing once. For example, read the Bhagavatam once and get acquainted with the pastimes. Get acquainted with what's going on. Otherwise, practical thing, it will take you a long time to read the Bhagavatam. And it helps an overview, having that overview of the Bhagavatam, it helps you, or any book, all of Srila Prabhupada's books, it helps you understand different parts of Srila Prabhupada's books. For example, having knowledge of the Bhagavatam, it makes it easier to understand Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Even understanding Chaitanya Charitamrita, which isn't necessarily always chronological, it's easier to understand when you know who the devotees are. You only know who the devotees are when you get to the end of it, basically, for the most part. So yeah, like that. Even as you read more, so it's not necessarily wrong making a deep study the first time, but I would just recommend read generally the first time, because even if you want to make a deep study, then it will help you make a deep study later on, just to have that overview, like gloss, basically. So you learn so much just from reading the first time too. It's not like actually from a study you get so many things. Just like in class, we can bring out so many points from a verse. You can do that for each and every verse of Bhagavatam, actually. So you have something as well?
So this point was being made about like the whole purpose of hearing Krishna's pastimes, even like the creation, is to develop love of God.
Uh-huh.
But then you were also making the point about how like it's not always that can be developed based off of like just hearing and explaining Krishna's pastimes, but it's about rasa. So I'm just wondering, when it comes to like developing love for Krishna, if it's more about like experiencing Krishna rather than necessarily like strictly just the pastimes. Like how does that, like love manifest? If you're hearing the pastimes and you don't necessarily like understand them, then how are we?
Yeah, well, you go on hearing. That's what Prabhupada would say. Even if you don't understand it, just go on hearing, and then you will come to understand like that. As far as rasa, rasa comes actually when we develop love of God. Otherwise, we don't have experience of, maybe at the stage of bhava, there may be some rasa that's manifesting, but practically it's only fully manifested. That taste in Krishna, not exactly taste, but rasa is difficult to translate. Mellow in Krishna consciousness. We only experience that rasa at a higher level of Krishna consciousness. So as far as developing that love, well, the general principle, even if we don't understand it, Krishna's pastimes inherently are purifying. We'll take it like this. They inherently even if we don't fully understand them, or maybe we're not even at the stage of fully relishing them, which most of us aren't. For those on the level of practicing devotional service, unless you're on the relishing, comes at the level of perfection. Of course, even at the neophyte stage, Krishna's pastimes can be pleasing to hear about. Sometimes they're pleasing to hear about. Sometimes we fall asleep when we're reading the Bhagavatam. So pure devotees don't do that. But nevertheless, whether we're falling asleep or whether we're finding it pleasant, Krishna's pastimes are inherently purifying. So that point is, so same thing with the understanding of it. Whether you understand it, whether you don't understand it, often, to give another explanation, Srila Prabhupada, sometimes he would be giving a Hindi lecture, and he would have his English-speaking disciples who didn't understand a word sitting in that lecture, and he explained to them why. Because it's purifying. The vibration itself is purifying. They don't understand anything, obviously, what Prabhupada was saying, but Prabhupada considered it purifying. Now, I'm not saying you have to go to sit and like listen to Hindi classes or something like that, but just the general principle is that the vibration itself is purifying. So just by understanding or associating, hearing Krishna's pastimes from a devotee, obviously, we become purified from that. Whether we're relishing or not, most of the time we're not, unfortunately, or whether we understand or whether we don't. The main thing is purification. That's the whole point of reading, at least where we're at. So, okay? Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.